This video will give you 7 simple melody writing tips which will help you create tunes like this. Tip number 1. There are no rules. The most important melody rule is that there are no rules. If it sounds good to you, then you have a great melody. This tip isn't helpful, you may say. As a beginner, you need some help and inspiration. You watch this video for melody tips. You are correct. I lied. To make up for this, I'll give you a bonus tip at the end. Tip number 2. Start with the chords. The easiest way to create a melody is to use the notes from the chords playing in the song. Each standard major and minor chord has 3 notes. This means that as the chords change, our selection of notes change. Some chords have notes in common which allow us to hold a note as the chords change. Whilst this is the easiest melody writing technique, it does create very predictable, safe-sounding tunes. If you want to write something a little more interesting, then this next tip is for you. Tip number 3. Create tension. Without tension, your song will sound like a nursery rhyme. Tension is important in melodies to stop it being boring and to amplify the emotion. In order to create this tension, we need to use notes that aren't in the underlying chords. When it comes to which of these notes we can use, there are 2 main schools of thought: chord scale notes and key scale notes. Chord scale notes come from the 7 notes in the scale related to a chord. For example, if we have an F major chord playing, we will use the 7 notes from the F major scale. These are F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. F, A, and C are the notes in the chord, so G, B flat, D, and E would be our tense notes. These are always the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 7th notes of the major or minor scale. If the chord changes, then we change the notes we use to the scale of the new chord. Alternatively, key scale notes come from the scale relating to the key of the song. The key of a song dictates what chords sound good together. So if we have a song in the key of C major, we will use the C major scale. This will remain the same throughout the song, so it will not change with the chords like the chord scale technique did. This idea may be familiar to you if you play guitar solos over chord changes. One final thing we can do to remove some potentially difficult sounding notes is to blend both of these approaches. To do this, we look at the notes in the current chord scale and the key scale and only use the notes that appear in both. For example, the F chord we saw earlier is in the key of C major. F major has the notes F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. C major has the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. B and B flat are the only notes that don't appear in both, so we can discount them. Therefore, our pool of melody notes whilst the F chord plays is F, G, A, C, D, E. It is worth noting that each of these tense notes has its own quality. Some are tenser than others. It can be hard to describe this, but once you've worked out your notes for a given chord, it is worth experimenting to see which one gives you the tension you require. Now we need to look at where to place these notes. Tip number 4. Note location is important. Where a note appears in a bar can have an impact on its effect. This is particularly important with these tense notes that aren't in the underlying chord. When landing on a new chord, if we go straight to the tense note, it has a greater impact than if it appears after we have heard the chord and possibly some of the chord notes in the melody. On the other hand, if we link between these with tense notes of a short length, then we can reduce the tension. These are sometimes known as passing notes. Like everything in a melody, this is a balancing act that you as a songwriter are in control of. The theme or feel of the song, or maybe the accompanying lyrics, will guide you as to which way to go. Use your ear and trust it. If this video is helping you, then like the video and subscribe for more melody tips. Tip number 5. Alter note lengths. Playing all the notes for the same duration would become boring. There are many ways to divide up each bar to create interesting rhythms for our melody. With 4/4 time, which is the most common time signature used for songs, we have 4 beats in each bar. Here are some visualizations of these lengths. Please note that this is not musical notation. So we can have a whole note which lasts a whole bar, half a note which lasts half a bar, a quarter note which lasts for a quarter of a bar, an eighth note which lasts for an eighth of a bar, and a 16th note which lasts for a 16th of a bar. These are some of the more common note lengths used in melodies, There are, of course, other divisions. We can also use rests for breaking up our tunes. A rest is just a period of silence, and they will use the same note lengths as we've just discussed. We can sustain the tension in our melody by increasing the note length of our non-chord notes. One way to do this is by using what's known as a dotted note. This is where the duration of the note is increased by 50%. So for example, a dotted quarter note is the equivalent of a quarter note plus an eighth note. This contrast between longer and shorter notes can be useful for our melody. For example, a dotted quarter note with an eighth note after it gives the melody extra movement or a kind of galloping feel. If we place our notes between the beats of a bar, then it can reduce the monotony. Remember, there are 4 beats in a bar in 4/4 time. So use rests, dotted notes, or different note lengths to make the change of notes in your melody fall between this structure of 4. If we want to reduce tension, we can shorten the amount of time on a non-chord note. Tip number 6, falling down and then getting back up. When creating melodies, it is important to consider the shape of the pattern they form. Melodies can move downwards or upwards, and they can move in small steps or big leaps. A falling pattern followed by a rising pattern is quite a common way to form a melody. Balancing the movement or shape of the melody is another important part of creating and maintaining interest. You don't want a static melody throughout the song. Tip number 7. Tripling up. One way to add a little excitement to a progression in 4/4 time is to use triplets. A triplet splits a beat or part of a beat into 3 equal parts. Triplets can add spice to a rhythm and can add a spring or an element of surprise to the melody. They're best used sparingly because if you want this feel for all the time, then you should really change the time signature of your song. And now it's time for your bonus tip. Bonus tip. Recycling ideas. After spending so much time and care creating melody ideas, it seems a shame to just use them once. An easy way to recycle an idea later in a song is to double the duration of the notes. This means that the relationship to the chords underneath will change, but the familiarity from earlier in the song should help to make it sound acceptable to the listener. You can also go the other way and halve the duration, depending on what feel you're going for. Let's now put all the tips into practice with an example. We'll use the key of C major. There are 4 chords in the song: C, A minor, F and G. Using tip number 3, we use the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B when C and A minor are playing. When the F chord plays, we won't play the B note. And when the G chord plays, we won't play the F note. The first 4 bars are like a mini intro. The chords avoid the one chord to dilute the sense of key and let it have more impact when it comes in later. However, we start the melody on C because it is a note from the underlying F chord. We use a dotted quarter note followed by an eighth note as mentioned in tip number 5 to start us off with a feeling of movement. Our first tense note appears in the end of bar 1 after 2 chord notes, so it doesn't have such a big impact. Bar 2 repeats the rhythm, but this time our first C note is not part of the underlying G chord, so it has a tenser feeling. You can see in bars 3 and 4 we mix chord notes with tense non-chord notes and have a gentle up and down pattern. Bar 5 is where we first hear the one chord C. This could be like a verse. You can see we have leapt up to a higher C note, and this section of melody ends on C an octave lower, so we have a more aggressive or steeper pattern to our melody. We are mixing note lengths, rests, and chord and non-chord notes to maintain interest in our song. The shorter A minor chord in bar 6 takes us up to a repeat of the section. On the second repeat, we change the notes over A minor at the end, starting with a tenser note and stepping us down into a short chord progression. This little break uses inversions to take us into what may be considered the chorus. We start on C in bar 11 with C notes and step up to the F chord in bar 12. In bar 12 we use more tense notes to contrast with bar 11. In bar 13 we start with a triplet from tip number 7. Notice the change in feel it provides here. This is the only time we use a triplet in the melody. We then stay fairly static going into A minor with a shared note. Bar 15 is fairly standard and bar 16 only uses chord notes in an arpeggio to create a safer feeling sound. Bar 17 is the start of our last phrase. We start with an octave leap from G to G. This is the safest chord note, so the big leap isn't too jarring. We then step down towards the A minor chord in bar 18 and finish with a big drop to B and then a small step up to C. In bars 19 to 22, we use our bonus tip and recycle our melody. We simply double the duration of the notes and the chords. You can hear how this same but different idea creates an interesting feel with the melody. The only change we make is when the final note comes up to C, we change the chord as well to provide us with a nice conclusion to the song. If you need help with a chord progression to go with your melody, then check out this playlist.